family. It's about connecting to something bigger than yourself. Whatever life throws at us, we'll face it together.
We will protect you.
I have the pleasure of sitting here with Mr. Matt Shakman, the director of the Fantastic Four First Steps.
It's great to be here, thank you.
So I'll start, you literally just reviewed the film in IMAX. Could you talk about how that feeling was, and were there any moments in particular that you were really like blown away by?
I'm blown away by IMAX in general. I love going to see movies in IMAX. It's my favorite format. And being here at the IMAX headquarters in Los Angeles has been a big part of our process. We came down here before we started making the film in prep, and we were studying movies that we loved. We watched Interstellar here. We watched the Apollo 11 documentary that was made a few years ago for the 50th anniversary. It's just been an incredible resource for us working with the folks here at IMAX. It's been a great way to see what works at scale and to try to figure out how we could build a world that would fit an IMAX screen. I just think it's so immersive as a format, and we wanted that feeling for the movie.
You know, aspect ratios, IMAX aspect ratios have been a huge topic of conversation this year. And could you talk a little bit about your usage of the IMAX aspect ratios in this film?
The entire movie is in 190, which means it's in that IMAX format the entire time, which I think will be really exciting. But also, it not only is it immersive, but it's close to 185, which is the more sort of traditional, almost more period aspect ratio in general. And our movie is set in a retro future 1960s, so that period aspect of it was a strong component in leaning towards 190 as well. But then we do open up to 143, which is the super huge, giant, more like a square format. For chunks of the movie, especially. I don't want to ruin where that happens, but for moments where we wanted even more scale, and I'm sure you can imagine what those moments are if you know who our bad guy is.
Yeah, reading between the lines here,
Yeah.
yes. You talked about this a little bit, actually, leading into my next question, but retro future and the visuals in this film are so distinct and different from various movies that we see today. I had read somewhere that you had mentioned you wanted to make it in a way that Stanley Kubrick would make this film. Could you talk about the visuals, the aesthetic in this film, and why it was such an important way to go with the Fantastic Four First Steps?
I'm a huge fan of Stanley Kubrick, who isn't. 2001, one of the most beautiful, amazing movies ever made, and also takes place so much in space, which our movie does as well. So we did talk about what is the intersection between Kirby and Kubrick? Jack Kirby being the creator of the Fantastic Four, one of the two was Stan Lee, but the artist who drew them. And so where does the Kirby style intersect with the Kubrick style? And that was our sort of guiding light in figuring out what we wanted this world to look like. But we also wanted it to feel like it was made in the 60s to a degree. I mean, obviously we used a lot of modern technology. We'd be silly not to, but we built miniatures. We built a giant Galactus outfit. We built huge practical sets. We built practical Herbie, practical Fantasticar. We did everything that we could to ground it in a reality. We used vintage lenses. We tried to approach things optically. The Sue Storm powers is an optical effect that you could have done in the 60s, and that we used video projectors and things like that to create. So it was trying to find a way to ground it in an authenticity, but at the same time, what's great about Kubrick when he made 2001 is he was dreaming of a future, right? So it had that retro future quality, yet it was made in the 60s, and that's why it was such a guiding thing for our aesthetic. It was like, what would the future look like to the people of the 60s? Not to us, but what would it look like to the people of the 60s? And what would happen if you had the smartest man in the universe there starting to create things 20, 30 years before that was going to change your world? And you had Reed Richards, who's like Steve Jobs meets Einstein, and so the whole world really shows the effect of the Fantastic Four technology meeting with the 60s that we know and are familiar with.
Well, you had me at the intersection of Kirby and Kubrick, by the way. Like, you had me there. I'm all yours. And we did get a chance to meet a practical Herbie here at IMAX. I don't know if you saw, but he took over our office. So
oh, great.
That's been rolling out.
That's great.
I've heard you talk at length about your fandom of the Fantastic Four comic books, and being the first family of Marvel. Could you talk about that impact that your fandom had influencing the final product of the film?
Yeah, I've loved the Fantastic Four since I was a kid. You know, I think there's something about that family of superheroes, and I felt it also in WandaVision, which was something I made for Marvel before this, which was also about a family. It's special. You know, there's a lot of found families. You've got the Avengers, you've got the X-Men, but it's rare that you actually have husband and wife, you know, brother and sister, mother, father, child. Like, there's a lot of dynamics within the Fantastic Four that are really special, and they really aren't superheroes first, right? They're family first, they're explorers and scientists second, and then superheroes kind of only when they have to be, only when they have to protect their world or protect their family, right? And they're very charming, they're very funny, the relationship between the siblings, the relationship between Ben and Johnny, the relationship between, you know, best friend Reed and Ben, they all have these wonderful, deep history. So that was what was appealing to me. I was also a big Spider-Man fan, and Spider-Man and Johnny Storm were friends, and I thought that was really cool because I always felt more like Spider-Man, like the nerdy guy, and Johnny was so cool, and so the idea that the nerdy Spider-Man guy could be friends with the cool Human Torch was cool. And so, yeah, it was always aspirational for me. And then coming to it now, you know, now that I'm a husband, now that I'm a father, I view it differently than I did as a kid, you know, and I think everybody who makes an adaptation of something that they love, whether it's a book or a comic book, they're bringing themselves to it, right? They're looking at that story through the lens of their own life. And so for me, I look at it as a dad, I look at it as a husband, and I see so much of my daughter in this movie. I see so much of my wife in these characters, and the dynamic that I have with them is part of the dynamic of this movie.
Also, I definitely can empathize with the Fantastic Four and Spider-Man comic book collection. If you go back to my parents' house in Minnesota, you'll probably find that somewhere.
Nice.
You know, speaking of fandom, I mean, we've seen in the marketing, Galactus is in this movie. I would be remiss if I didn't get to pick your brain on how fun it was to get to play with the character of Galactus and including him in this story. What does that mean to you?
Well, it means IMAX is what it means to me, you know? I mean, because he's huge, right? He's enormous, and we wanted to be able to create that scale. We needed it to be believable. We wanted it to be driven by a performance, and Ralph Fiennes, an incredible actor, is behind that performance in every frame of the movie, but we also needed that scale to be believable. And so we built a costume for him, and we shot him like you would shoot a miniature, and what you do is you just pump a ton of light in there so that it doesn't have the same kind of focal fall off that you and I have when you film a face that's as tiny as ours compared to Galactus. How do you film Mount Rushmore? How do you make one of our faces feel as big as Mount Rushmore? And so again, we approached it optically, and we tried to figure out a solution to make his scale feel believable on screen. And then every time you're putting him on screen, you're figuring out what are those scale cues? Like, how do you tell people just how big he is without you always kind of have to have a little human in there, or a little surfer in there, something in there to tell you what that scale is, right? Because, you know, when the Star Wars Imperial Destroyer goes over the top of you, you know it's huge because you can see the little doors and the little windows and all that stuff. And those are your cues. But on, you know, Galactus' ship, everything is Galactus sized. So it was about trying to figure out how do you accomplish that trick of scale.
Galactus is literally meant for IMAX, so this is a perfect pairing already.
100%, I agree.
You know, IMAX is such an amazing format. If you could experience any movie in IMAX, again or for the first time, as a fan, what would you choose to experience and why?
So yeah, there's so many movies, you know, the chance to see Dune, which I did here, it was incredible. So many of our best filmmakers are obviously working in IMAX for a reason, whether it's Ryan Coogler or Denis Villeneuve or Christopher Nolan or Jordan Peele. Like, so many people are drawn to it for an obvious reason, which is that it's the best way to see a movie.
And Matt Shakman.
Hey, yes.
So, last question for you. You know, this movie is filmed for IMAX. Why should fans seek out an experience of IMAX for the Fantastic Four first steps?
We designed this movie to be shot in IMAX. We intended every bit of the frame to fit the IMAX screen. It wasn't something that we did later. You know, it wasn't something that we, you know, retrofit to fit the screen. We knew this was where it was designed to be seen in all of its glory. And so the visual effects, even the sound design, everything is designed to be seen on an IMAX screen. And that's where you'll get the best possible version of this film.
Fantastic.